Hello everyone. Today we are going to study the pharynx. So this is a sagittal section of the head and neck, the kind which you commonly get in the exams. And this is the pharynx or the food passage. Actually the pharynx is a passage which is common for both food and air, although the two do not always flow together. Now this pharynx is a more or less musculomembranous tube which transmits both air and food in different places and at different times. So this pharynx extends from the base of the skull above to the level of the sixth cervical vertebra below, that is to the level of the cricoid cartilage. So you have first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. So up to the level of the sixth cervical vertebra you have the pharynx, and beyond sixth the pharynx continues as the esophagus. So the pharynx extends from the base of the skull to the level of the cricoid cartilage and to the level of the sixth cervical vertebra. Now this pharynx is divided into three parts: a nasopharynx behind the nasal cavity, an oropharynx behind the oral cavity, and the laryngopharynx behind the larynx, and particularly the inlet of the larynx. So behind the nasal cavity, nasopharynx; behind the oral cavity, oropharynx; and behind the larynx you have laryngopharynx. In this picture, this is the nasopharynx, this is the oropharynx, and this is the laryngopharynx. Now if you take them one by one, let us take this nasopharynx first. Now this nasopharynx, anteriorly you can see it communicates with the nasal cavity, and this opening over here is the posterior nares. Above you have the base of the skull, particularly the part formed by the base of basisphenoid and the basiocciput, that is the lower surface of the clevus, that is partly formed by the body of the sphenoid and partly formed by the basilar part of the occipital bone. And further posteriorly you have the first cervical vertebra, that is the atlas. And on either side this nasopharynx, the entire pharynx is covered by a mucous membrane, and in the lateral wall of the nasopharynx you can see here the opening of the auditory tube, and you can see a elevation just above and behind the opening of the auditory tube. This is called the tubal elevation. Actually you are likely to get a specimen of the sagittal section of the head and neck in the exam, and if you do, then all of these points you will have to say, you will have to describe, you might have to answer questions regarding these things. So in the lateral wall of the nasopharynx you have the opening of the auditory tube, and you have the tubal elevation over here, and on the roof of the nasopharynx over here you have a mass of lymphoid tissue, that is the nasopharyngeal tonsil, which when enlarged are known as adenoids. And within this nasopharyngeal tonsil you can have a small depression which would be the pharyngeal bursa. So a small depression over here which represents the tethering of the notochord to the primitive gut tube. So over here you can also have remnants or vestiges of pituitary tissue, which would then be called pharyngeal hypophysis. Now this opening of the auditory tube, and in fact the view of the entire nasopharynx is not easily obtained from the nose. So if you shine a torch into the nasal cavity, you can see maybe up to this point, but you cannot see the back side of the nasal cavity, neither can you see the nasopharynx. So to see all these structures of the nasopharynx, that is the posterior wall and the lateral wall of the nasopharynx, you have to put in a PNS mirror, an obliquely angled mirror with a handle through the mouth, which is called the post-nasal space mirror or the PNS mirror. And through that mirror you can see this nasopharynx and the posterior opening, the posterior nares of the nasal cavity. So this is the nasopharynx. We will come to the auditory tube later. This auditory tube is very important. It has to be dealt with in greater detail. But now temporarily we slip to the oropharynx. So then if this is the oropharynx, what is the junction between the oropharynx and the nasopharynx? It is the level of the soft palate. So this soft palate, you can see it is hanging down over here, But if the palatal muscles are contracted, that is if the palatine aponeurosis within the soft palate is stretched, then the soft palate would have been horizontal and it would have struck the posterior pharyngeal wall somewhere here. And in the posterior pharyngeal wall, you have the elevation of the palatopharyngeus, the transverse fibers of the palatopharyngeus forming the passovans ridge over the superior constrictor muscle. So this passovans ridge and the soft palate, they form the boundary between the nasopharynx and the oropharynx, and it forms the nasopharyngeal isthmus. So this soft palate and passovans ridge together form the nasopharyngeal isthmus, and it prevents regurgitation of food and fluids from the oral cavity to the nasal cavity. Now if we come to the oropharynx, just as here we have struck a boundary between the nasal cavity and the nasopharynx by the posterior nares or posterior openings of the nasal cavity, so here also between the oral cavity in front and the oropharynx behind, there is a boundary. This is called the oropharyngeal isthmus. Now this boundary is not as rigid as this nasopharyngeal isthmus, but in the oropharyngeal isthmus you have on the sides the palatoglossal arches. So the two palatoglossal arches from the right and the left, just in front of the tonsil, somewhere here you have palatoglossal arch, and behind the tonsil you have the palatopharyngeal arch, and somewhere here you have the palatine tonsil. So these palatoglossal arches and the soft palate above, and the posterior 1/3 of the tongue below. So posterior 1/3 of the tongue or pharyngeal part of the tongue, palatoglossal arches and the undersurface of the soft palate, they together form a sort of a boundary between the oral cavity and the oropharynx. So if you consider that this part is the oropharynx, the interesting item in the lateral wall of the oropharynx is the palatine tonsil. This slight bulge over here, this is the palatine tonsil, and just as in the lateral wall of the nasopharynx, the important structure was the opening of the auditory tube. So in the oropharynx, in the lateral wall, the important structure is the opening of the palatine tonsil. So this palatine tonsil is bounded in front by the palatoglossal arch and behind by the palatopharyngeal arch, below by the posterior 1/3 of the tongue and above by the undersurface of the soft palate. This triangular space is then the tonsillar fossa. And in the passing we would like to mention that this mucosa of the nasopharynx is lined by pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, that is respiratory epithelium, and both the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx are lined by ciliated stratified squamous epithelium. So stratified squamous epithelium like the oral cavity, stratified squamous non-keratinized, stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium, pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So if we come to the laryngopharynx over here, now behind the nasopharynx we have said you have the first cervical vertebra, behind the oropharynx you have the second and third cervical vertebra, and behind the laryngopharynx you have fourth, fifth and sixth cervical vertebra. So behind nasopharynx 1 vertebra, behind oropharynx 2 vertebrae, behind laryngopharynx 3 vertebrae. So laryngopharynx extends then from this point, from the tip of the epiglottis to the lower border of the cricoid cartilage. So from the tip of the epiglottis to the lower border of the cricoid cartilage, fourth, fifth and sixth cervical vertebrae, this is roughly the relation of the laryngopharynx. And in the anterior wall of the laryngopharynx you have this inlet of the larynx, and this inlet of the larynx is bounded above by the tip of the epiglottis, on the sides by the aryepiglottic fold, below by the arytenoid cartilage, and in the midline by the interarytenoid fold of mucous membrane. So in the lateral wall of the nasopharynx auditory tube, lateral wall of the oropharynx palatine tonsil, anterior wall of the laryngopharynx you have the inlet of the larynx, and by the sides of the inlet of the larynx you have the aryepiglottic folds. And by the sides of the aryepiglottic folds you have a depression which is called the pyriform fossa. So the pyriform fossa is just outside these aryepiglottic folds. So if you push your finger outside these aryepiglottic folds, So we have studied a lot of the pharynx. You have seen as much of the pharynx as you can see from the inside. Now about the mucous membrane. Since we have studied up to, we have seen the nasopharynx, the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx, you must be curious about the nerve supply of the mucous membrane of these three regions. Now the mucous membrane of the nasopharynx is supplied by the pharyngeal branches of the pterygopalatine ganglion. Now these sensory fibers don't relay in the pterygopalatine ganglion, they relay in the ganglion of the trigeminal nerve. So these sensations are carried actually by the maxillary division of the trigeminal nerve. Now in the oropharynx, the sensations are mainly carried by the glossopharyngeal nerve and partly by the internal laryngeal branch of the vagus nerve. In the laryngopharynx, the sensations are mostly carried by the internal laryngeal branch of the vagus nerve. Now apart from this opening of the auditory tube in the nasopharynx, this tubal elevation that you can see is due to a mass of lymphoid tissue over there, and this is also called the tubal tonsil. So you have the lingual tonsil over here, the palatine tonsil over here, the tubal tonsil over here, and the nasopharyngeal tonsil over here. So all these masses of lymphoid tissue together form the Waldear's ring, as we have mentioned once before, and they guard the opening of the aerodigestive tract and help in sampling ingested and inhaled antigens. Now behind the auditory tube you can see a small depression over here, a small recess. This is called the pharyngeal recess or the fossa of Rosenmuller. Now these things are important because occasionally you can have vascular tumors arising from these points, and so at that time you have to be very clear about the topography of these regions. Now from this discussion of the pharynx we will move to another view. If you look at this view of the pharynx, this is a posterior cutout view of the pharynx. You can see here the beginning of the esophagus is there. So this is actually the posterior wall of the pharynx has been cut out from the base of the skull to the esophagus. And here again we shall divide it into nasopharynx behind the nose and up to soft palate, oropharynx from the soft palate to the epiglottis, and laryngopharynx from the epiglottis to the lower border of the cricoid cartilage. As you can see here, the pink structure is the nasopharynx, the yellowish orange structure is the oropharynx, and the blue structure is the laryngopharynx. So again here in this view you can see the posterior aperture of the nasal cavity. You can see the posterior nares of the nasal cavity. You can see the partition between the nasal and oral cavity. This is the soft palate, which is the partition between the nasal cavity and the oral cavity, and you can see the uvula over here. So these structures you can see, and not only that, you can see the styloid process. You can see the stylohyoid muscle and the stylohyoid ligament as well. Now this much then is the nasopharynx, and not only that, because this is the nasopharynx, on the sides walls of the nasopharynx you have the openings of the auditory tube, and from the auditory tube you can see these folds coming down into the pharynx, the salpingopharyngeal fold over here and over here. So if you cut out the pharynx from behind and if you look at the opening of the auditory tube on the side, then you can also see the folds descending from the auditory tube into the pharynx. So you can see the salpingopharyngeal fold containing the salpingopharyngeus muscle. And because this is the palate, from here you can have the palatopharyngeus muscle. So these muscles going back from the palate into the side wall of the pharynx, they are the palatopharyngeus muscle. And through the oropharynx, from the posterior aspect of the oropharynx, you can see the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. So you can see the pharyngeal part of the tongue over here with the unevenness of the submucosal lymphoid tissue. Again in the laryngopharynx over here you can clearly see the inlet of the larynx that you could not see from the sagittal section. So here the inlet of the larynx is very clear. So this view is important very much for the visualization of the inlet of the larynx. So you can see that the inlet of the larynx starts from the epiglottis The apex tip of the epiglottis, lateral margins of the epiglottis giving rise to the aryepiglottic fold, and ending here in the arytenoid cartilage and the interarytenoid fold of mucous membrane. Not only that, within this aryepiglottic fold, you can see the corniculate and the cuneiform cartilages. So, you have the corniculate and the cuneiform cartilages, these small dots over here. This is the cuneiform cartilage, this is the corniculate cartilage elevation. Because these are the elevations of the cartilages underneath, this is called the cuneiform tubercle, this is called the corniculate tubercle, and somewhere here lies the arytenoid cartilage. Over here you have one arytenoid cartilage, you have another arytenoid cartilage, and you have an interarytenoid fold of mucous membrane. So, inlet of larynx, epiglottis, aryepiglottic fold containing corniculate and cuneiform cartilages, arytenoid cartilage, and interarytenoid fold of mucous membrane. And by the sides of the aryepiglottic fold over here you have the pyriform fossa. So, on either side of the aryepiglottic fold, this depression is the pyriform fossa, which is between the aryepiglottic fold and the lamina of the thyroid cartilage. Here you have a stiff hard structure. If you can feel this, you can feel the posterior border of the lamina of the thyroid cartilage, so that between the lamina of the thyroid cartilage and the aryepiglottic fold, you have this pyriform fossa, and above you have the pharyngoepiglottic fold. So, pharyngoepiglottic fold above, aryepiglottic fold medially, and lamina of the thyroid cartilage below. This is actually the pyriform fossa. So, this posterior cutout view of the larynx also adds a lot of information and enriches our topographical knowledge. Let us see what comes next. Here you can see a schematic of that same posterior cutout view of the pharynx. Here you can see this posterior surface of the nose, the posterior nasal aperture. You can see the posterior nares or the choanae with the nasal concave, and you can see the opening of the auditory tube over here with the tubal elevation, and over here between the nasal cavity and the oral cavity you can see the soft palate, and in the midline the uvula, and below the soft palate this is the oropharynx. On the side walls of the oropharynx you can see the palatine tonsil, and you can see the posterior 1/3 of the tongue through the oropharynx, and beyond the oropharynx you have the laryngopharynx. Here you can see the epiglottis and the aryepiglottic fold and the interarytenoid fold of mucous membrane and the cricoid cartilage. So, in the anterior wall of the laryngopharynx you can see the inlet of the larynx, and by the sides of the aryepiglottic folds you can see the pyriform fossa. Now, just beneath the mucosa of the pyriform fossa you have the internal laryngeal nerve passing to supply the larynx. You must keep that in mind. Now, here we have what we call the Waldear's ring. We were saying that there is a ring of lymphoid tissue guarding the entrance of the upper aerodigestive tract and sampling antigens. This is a schematic for those masses of lymphoid tissue. In the oropharynx you had seen just in the posterior 1/3 of the tongue beneath the mucosa you had a collection of lymphoid tissue, that is the lingual tonsil. On the side walls of the oropharynx you have the palatine tonsil. On the side walls of the nasopharynx you have the opening of the auditory tube and the tubal tonsil, and in the posterior wall of the nasopharynx close to the roof you have the nasopharyngeal tonsil, which if enlarged is called adenoids. So, this is the sum total of Waldear's ring. Now, particularly these adenoids, because they are in the roof of the nasopharynx, if they are unduly enlarged, then they can cause an obstruction to breathing and difficulty in sleep, and it can impede the growth of the child also. This usually occurs in children. Previously, when adequate antibiotics and antiallergics were not available, adenoidectomy or excision of the nasopharyngeal tonsil was a common procedure. Nowadays, we have largely forgotten this sort of procedure because adenoids is not a major issue these days. Even problems with the tonsils are not a major issue these days. However, we will go into the details of the tonsils. Now, let us come to the palatine tonsils. In this sagittal section of the head and neck, you can see that the palatine tonsil is here, and it is in the side wall of the oropharynx and in a position which is called the tonsillar fossa. Now, these tonsils are not very prominent in this specimen, and they are not prominent on most adult specimens because the tonsils regress in adulthood. So, you can never see very large or prominent tonsils in your specimens. So, here also we have a small tonsil over here, and it lies in the tonsillar fossa or tonsillar sinus, which is a triangular area. The apex of the triangle is formed by the soft palate, and in front of the tonsil you have a palatoglossal fold containing the palatoglossus muscle, which extends from the soft palate, from the lower surface of the soft palate to the side of the tongue, between its anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3. So you have palatoglossus in front with the palatoglossal arch, and behind you have the palatopharyngeus with the palatopharyngeal arch. So between palatoglossus, palatopharyngeus, posterior 1/3 of the tongue, this triangular zone is the tonsillar fossa or the tonsillar sinus. Now, if you remove the tonsil, on the outer surface of the tonsillar sinus, that is in the wall of the pharynx, what will you get? You will get the superior constrictor muscle above and the styloglossus muscle below. So, outside the tonsillar fossa, in the tonsillar bed, you have the superior constrictor and you have the styloglossus. And still outside that, you have the glossopharyngeal nerve and you have the facial artery and some of its branches. Still outside that, you have the internal carotid artery and the styloid process. So, these are more or less the external relations of the tonsil. We will come to that a little bit later. Now, this tonsil is not just confined to the tonsillar fossa, but it insinuates itself into the surrounding pockets. So, part of the tonsil goes deep to the palatoglossal fold, part of the tonsil goes deep to the palatopharyngeal fold, part of the tonsil is anchored above to the soft palate, and this tonsil has got a hemicapsule. That means half of the tonsil has got a capsule and half of it hasn't. Now, the surface of the tonsil which faces inside the oropharynx, it does not have a capsule. But the surface of the tonsil which faces towards the superior constrictor, that is the outer surface of the tonsil, does have a capsule. That is why it is called a hemicapsule. And that capsule is adherent to the base of the tongue over here, to the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. So the tonsil is adherent above to the soft palate, below it is adherent to the base of the tongue, anteriorly and posteriorly it is adherent to palatoglossal and palatopharyngeal folds. Now this tonsil, it has a medial surface, it has a lateral surface, it has an anterior border, it has a posterior border, it has an upper pole and a lower pole. So the lateral surface bears the hemicapsule and is related to all those structures that we were mentioning just now. The anterior border is related to the palatoglossal fold and it insinuates itself behind that fold. Posterior border is related to the palatopharyngeal fold, it insinuates itself over there, and the lower pole is attached to the sides of the tongue by a ligament, suspensory ligament of the tonsil. Now this medial surface is pitted with many crypts. As you know, the tonsil is a mass of lymphoid tissue, and this surface facing inside the oropharynx is pitted with many depressions and elevations. Let us look at a later picture. Here you can see the tonsil in section, and you can see the medial surface here, you can see the lateral surface here, and you can see this hemicapsule, this half of a capsule on its lateral surface, that you can see, and you can see a little bit of the palatoglossus here, a little bit of the palatopharyngeus here, and the superior constrictor muscle over here. So superior constrictor muscle lies over here, and superior constrictor and a part of the styloglossus are the main structures forming the tonsillar bed. And on the medial surface you can see the crypts. These crypts of the tonsil you can see over here, and the largest of this is called the intratonsillar cleft over here. This intratonsillar cleft is a remnant of the second pharyngeal pouch. In fact, the tonsil has developed the second pharyngeal pouch, and the tonsil, the main structural framework of the tonsil is therefore endodermal, but it is populated with lymphocytes coming in from the bone marrow and secondarily populating the tonsil, and in an attempt to sample the ingested antigens over here and guarding the digestive tract. So you can see the crypts over here, and the larger crypt towards the upper pole is the intratonsillar cleft or intratonsillar sinus, and you can also make out that outside the tonsil you have a prominent vein, and this prominent paratonsillar vein is something that you have to be careful of when you are removing the tonsil. Now if you look at the relations of the tonsil, you can see that above it is adherent to the soft palate, below it is adherent to the tongue by the suspensory ligament, medial surface is pitted and uneven because of the crypts and the collections of lymphocytes, lateral surface contains the capsule, outside it is a prominent paratonsillar vein, still outside it is related to the superior constrictor, the inner fascia of the superior constrictor is the pharyngobasilar fascia, outer fascia of the superior constrictor is the buccopharyngeal fascia, and here you can see the pharyngeal venous plexus, and still outside you can see the branches of the facial artery, and you can see the styloglossus. So we were saying the superior constrictor and styloglossus, these two are forming the main components of the tonsillar bed, and still outside you have the internal carotid artery, styloid process, mandible and its inner attachment. This is the medial pterygoid attached to the inner surface of the ramus, and this is the masseter attached to the outer surface of the ramus. So in relations of the tonsil you can go from the air in the mouth to the air outside the cheeks, but all that is not necessary. If you can mention one or two important points in relation to the tonsil, I suppose that should be enough. And as you can see in this plane of the facial artery, you have the facial artery, tonsillar branch of the facial artery, ascending palatine artery, and palatine branch of the ascending pharyngeal artery. From this you can easily make out that a number of arteries are going to supply the tonsil. Let's see if we can get a clearer view of these arteries. So here we are. Here we can see the large number of arteries that are supplying the tonsil. You can see that the supply of the tonsil comes mainly from the facial artery. This tonsillar branch of the facial artery is the main arterial supply of the tonsil. Apart from that, you have posterior tonsillar arteries coming from the ascending palatine artery and the palatine branch of the ascending pharyngeal artery. From the greater palatine artery, that is a branch of the third part of the maxillary artery, you have some superior tonsillar branches descending to the tonsil. Again, from the lingual artery anteriorly, you have some branches going to the tonsillar artery from the second part of the lingual artery. So the tonsil, you can see, is richly supplied with blood from the tonsillar branch of the facial, ascending palatine branch of the facial, and palatine branch of the ascending pharyngeal, greater palatine artery from the third part of the maxillary artery, and the anterior tonsillar arteries from the second part of the lingual arteries. So all this is important. Now, before we go on to other structures, let us say something about tonsillectomy. Now, tonsillectomy operations nowadays are uncommon because tonsil infections are very easily detected nowadays because people are very much aware of tonsillitis, and these tonsils therefore are not a major pathological problem in pediatric ENT practice these days. Now, apart from the arterial supply of the tonsil, the venous drainage of the tonsil comes from large veins accompanying these arteries, as well as the paratonsillar vein which descends from the palate, goes by the tonsil and enters into the pharyngeal venous plexus. So the veins of the tonsil all drain into the pharyngeal venous plexus, and the pharyngeal veins drain into the internal jugular vein. Now the nerve supply of the tonsil is from the glossopharyngeal nerve. So the tonsil is supplied by glossopharyngeal nerve, and because the auditory tube is also supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve mainly, referred pain from the tonsil can go up to the glossopharyngeal nerve. That is another issue. So pain in the tonsil can appear as pain in the ear. Now again you see tonsillectomy. If we go to tonsillectomy, there were various different types of tonsillectomy in the past. Now, one of these tonsillectomy methods was known as, so this guillotine method of tonsillectomy is still being mentioned in some books, although it is obsolete. You know what used to be done in the guillotine method? There was a spring-loaded knife, and you had to snare this tonsillar matter into that opening of that spring-loaded knife, and that spring-loaded knife would crash in onto the frame and cut the tonsil like a guillotine. This was a very rough method of operation, and because you have this rich venous plexus around the tonsil, and because the tonsil is so vascular, if you do not dissect out the tonsil properly, but you do it in a rash manner, there is going to be slow oozing from the tonsillar bed, which is very difficult to control. And not only that, once you have removed the tonsil, what happens is in the tonsillar fossa, the palatoglossal and palatopharyngeal arches and the muscles contained therein, they contract gradually and try to close the space of the tonsillar fossa. So if you have slow oozing into the tonsillar bed and formation of large blood clots, the surrounding folds and muscles cannot contract over the tonsillar bed and effectively cut from the ligatures that you have put in on the vascular bed. Therefore, you see this guillotine method of tonsillectomy is obsolete. Nowadays, tonsil is operated on by meticulous dissection, and after taking due time and diligence, proper hemostasis is done so that post-operatively there is not much of venous oozing or deposition of clots in this region. However, if there are clots, they have to be removed so that proper shrinkage of the tonsillar fossa can occur and there can be stoppage of bleeding. Now, the lymphatic drainage of the tonsil is very important, because although you rarely have malignancies of the tonsil, but infections and inflammations of the tonsil in sore throat are quite common, and therefore lymphatic drainage of the tonsil is important. Lymphatics from the tonsil, as in all other organs of the head and neck, go to the deep cervical lymph nodes. For the tonsil, the most important group of the deep cervical lymph nodes is the jugulo-digastric lymph node. So the jugulo-digastric lymph node just above the posterior belly of the digastric, this is also known as the tonsillar lymph node. So the jugulo-digastric lymph node is the principal lymph node draining the palatine tonsil. Now, if we go beyond the tonsil, we have said that in the laryngopharynx, you had the opening of the larynx, the inlet of the larynx, and so this is the inlet of the larynx. You can see the aryepiglottic folds and the tip of the epiglottis and the hyoid bone. By the sides of the inlet of the larynx, we had said you had the pyriform fossa. So this is an enlarged view of the pyriform fossa, and I have already said that the internal laryngeal nerve, it comes beneath the mucosa in the pyriform fossa and supplies the larynx as well as the pyriform fossa. And you can make out that the pyriform fossa is actually between the aryepiglottic fold and the lamina of the thyroid cartilage. This depression is the pyriform fossa. Why we are stressing this thing off and on? It is because foreign bodies, when they are ingested like small fish bones or pins or whatever, first they will try to stick into the tonsil. If they do not stick into the tonsil, then they will stick into the posterior pharyngeal wall. And if they pass down the oropharynx into the laryngopharynx, they are likely to be embedded in the pyriform fossa. Unless, of course, by sheer misfortune, they enter the larynx. Then it's a very dangerous situation. But many foreign bodies are obstructed and embedded in the pyriform fossa, and you have to get them removed by an ENT surgeon. That is why the pyriform fossa is important. Let's see what we have next. Now we are going into the nitty-gritty of the muscles of the pharynx. So here in this diagram, we are going to see what the muscles of the pharynx are. So till now we have only been looking at the inner surfaces and the additional structures of the pharynx. Now you can see that the muscles of the pharynx are the extrinsic muscles and the longitudinal muscles and the circular muscles. We wouldn't say extrinsic and intrinsic because all the muscles of the pharynx have outer attachments. So to that extent they are all extrinsic muscles. So you see you have longitudinal muscles and circular muscles. So circular muscles are not exactly circular, they are not completely circular also, but roughly you can think of them as superimposed cones. So you have the superior constrictor overlapped by the middle constrictor, overlapped by the inferior constrictor. So they are roughly cone shaped, although in their side view they will appear to be fan shaped. Here you can see these are all appearing to be fan shaped muscles. So if you take the hand shapes of the two sides, then maybe they will give the appearance of cones. Now in the posterior view of the pharynx, they do look cone shaped. Do we have posterior view of the pharynx here? You see, in this posterior view of the pharynx, you can make out that you have the one cone here, one cone here, and one cone here. So there are three superimposed cones over here. So in the posterior view of the pharynx, they do look cone shaped. So there are three overlapping muscles, of which let us take the superior constrictor. The superior constrictor is the highest of these muscles, and it is attached right from the base of the skull to the mandible. Now the superior constrictor, this is the medial pterygoid plate, that means it's part of the sphenoid bone. To the posterior border of the medial pterygoid plate, you have the attachment of the superior constrictor. Then you have the pterygoid hamulus. From the pterygoid hamulus to the mandible behind the third molar tooth, you have the pterygomandibular raphe, which is the partition between the superior constrictor behind and the buccinator in front. So you have the attachment of the superior constrictor along the pterygomandibular raphe to the mandible behind the third molar tooth and partly to the side of the tongue as well. So you have a part of the superior constrictor attachment to medial pterygoid plate, pterygoid hamulus, pterygomandibular raphe, mandible behind the third molar tooth and the side of the tongue. Posteriorly, these fibers are sweeping back into a midline raphe where the fibers, the superior constrictor muscles of the two sides, they are going to converge, and this midline raphe, pharyngeal raphe, goes up into the base of the skull, and it is attached to the basilar part of the occipital bone to the pharyngeal tubercle. Now overlapping the superior constrictor is the middle constrictor. Middle constrictor extends from its attachment. Now this is the styloid process. You have the stylohyoid ligament. So a part of the middle constrictor is attached to the stylohyoid ligament, and a major part of the middle constrictor, after being attached to the stylohyoid ligament, it is attached to the greater cornu of the hyoid bone. So stylohyoid ligament and greater cornu of the hyoid bone and the lesser cornu of the hyoid bone, because the stylohyoid ligament is attached to the lesser cornu. So middle constrictor attachment partly to the stylohyoid ligament, partly to the lesser cornu of the hyoid bone, partly to the greater cornu of the hyoid bone. This is also fan shaped with a downward extension going up almost up to the level of the cricoid cartilage, and an upward extension overlapping the superior constrictor and going up into the pharyngeal tubercle. And overlapping these two again from the outside is the inferior constrictor. And this inferior constrictor, you can see, is partly attached to the lamina of the thyroid cartilage and the oblique line of the thyroid cartilage, and it is jumping over the attachment of the cricothyroid muscle between the thyroid and the cricoid cartilages, and it is attached to the cricoid cartilage as well. So this inferior constrictor muscle has two distinct parts. It has the upper oblique thyropharyngeal part and the lower horizontal cricopharyngeal part. So this cricopharyngeal part of the inferior constrictor also behaves as the upper sphincter of the esophagus. So at the pharyngoesophageal junction, you have a sort of a sphincter which is formed by the transversely placed cricopharyngeal part of the inferior constrictor. So you have thyropharyngeus, you have cricopharyngeus. Now between these two groups of muscles, there is a small gap bridged by fibrous tissue, and this gap is called the Killian's dehiscence. And through this Killian's dehiscence, in rise of pressure within the aerodigestive tract, you can have a bulging of the mucous membrane of the pharynx. You can have a pharyngeal diverticulum. So that is why this gap between the thyropharyngeus and the cricopharyngeus is important. So you can have a pharyngeal diverticulum coming out through this gap, through this Killian's dehiscence. So now we have seen the superior constrictor, we have seen the middle constrictor, and we have seen the inferior constrictor. Now there are a number of structures. Now above the superior constrictor, you can understand that this superior constrictor, between the pterygoid hamulus and the pharyngeal tubercle, it has a free upper end. And this free upper end, because it does not have the muscle, but it does have the covering fascia of the pharyngeal muscles, that is the buccopharyngeal fascia and the pharyngobasilar fascia. Now in this picture we have again gone to the base of the skull because we want to highlight certain things. Now in the base of the skull you can see this is the occipital bone over here, and this is the basilar part of the occipital bone, and this is the pharyngeal tubercle in the basilar part of the occipital bone. That means this median raphe, which is situated posterior to the pharynx, which actually takes in the attachments of the superior, middle and inferior constrictors in the midline, it is attached here. So if this is the median the attachment of the median raphe of the pharynx, then in front of it you have the pharyngobasilar fascia, and behind it you have the buccopharyngeal fascia. Because the buccopharyngeal fascia is a thickening of the outer epimysium of the muscles, and the pharyngobasilar fascia is the thickening of the inner epimysium of the muscles. So they are all thickenings of the fibrous tissue coverings of the muscle. So the outer one is the buccopharyngeal fascia and the inner one is the pharyngobasilar fascia. Now over here this green structure is the sphenoid and this red structure is the vomer. So this is the medial pterygoid plate of the sphenoid. Here you have the medial pterygoid plate of the sphenoid. That means this superior constrictor is attached to this lower part of the medial pterygoid plate, and it is attached to the pterygoid hamulus, and from this part it is going down into the mandible. From the pterygoid hamulus the superior constrictor is going down into the mandible along the pterygomandibular raphe. So pterygomandibular raphe, posterior border of the medial pterygoid plate. But from the posterior border of the medial pterygoid plate up to the base of the skull, this much area is a gap above the upper free margin of the superior constrictor, and it is this gap region above the free margin of the superior constrictor that is bridged just by the outer and inner fibrous coats of the pharynx, that is the buccopharyngeal fascia and the pharyngobasilar fascia. They are blended, and it is this fibrous portion which bridges the gap between the upper free margin of the superior constrictor and the base of the skull, and this gap is called the sinus of Morgagni, and this sinus of Morgagni is pierced by the auditory tube and some other structures. Therefore, where would you place the auditory tube? This you see is the petrous part of the temporal bone. Here is the apex of the petrous part of the temporal bone. That means somewhere here is the foramen lacera between apex petrous temporal and the root of the pterygoid process and the body of the sphenoid. So this is the petrous part of the temporal, this is the greater ring of the sphenoid, and between them over here where the pointer lies, this is the sulcus tubi or the sulcus for the auditory tube. So the auditory tube lies like this in the sulcus tubi, and the auditory tube passes in this direction. From this sulcus it takes the support. You can see a small prominence over here on the posterior margin of the medial pterygoid plate. You have a small elevation, and this elevation supports the auditory tube when it passes in this direction. So the auditory tube, like the tip of the pointer, now opens into the nasopharynx. So at one point the auditory tube has to pierce the pharynx. So where it will pierce the pharynx? It will pierce above the free margin of the superior constrictor. That is, it will pierce the sinus of Morgagni, lie in the sulcus tubi, take the support of this small elevation in the posterior margin of the medial pterygoid plate, and enter the nasopharynx from the side like this. And so much for this. Now let us see what appears next. Now after these three constrictors, which are more or less circular or fan-shaped and circular muscles, we come to the three longitudinal muscles of the pharynx, that is stylopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus and palatopharyngeus. So if you come from behind forward, the posterior most structure is the styloid process. So you see the styloid process is the posterior most structure. So from the styloid process you have the stylopharyngeus. Now from the styloid process, if you move anteriorly, the next anterior structure is the auditory tube. So this blue cartilaginous structure here is the auditory tube. So this is the styloid process over here, this pin like a spike like structure. From this you had stylopharyngeus. Now this cartilaginous portion is the auditory tube. From here you have salpingopharyngeus. And over here you have the soft palate. From the soft palate you have palatopharyngeus. At least the downward going fibers of the palatopharyngeus. You know that in addition to the downward going fibers of the palatopharyngeus, you also have horizontal fibers of the palatopharyngeus, which are called Passavant's muscle, which form the block for the soft palate when it is elevated to shut off the nasopharynx from the oropharynx. So you have stylopharyngeus from the posterior most styloid process, you have the salpingopharyngeus from the intermediately paced auditory tube, and you have palatopharyngeus from the anterior most structure, that is the soft palate. Stylopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus, palatopharyngeus. They are all going down and getting attached to the posterior border of the lamina of the thyroid cartilage. That means during deglutition, these are the fibers that are going to pull the larynx as well as the pharynx upward towards the base of the skull. Just as the circularly arranged superior, middle and inferior constrictor muscles, they have a propulsive action which will push the bolus of food and drink down towards the esophagus. These three vertically placed muscles are going to drag the pharynx and larynx up and help in this process of deglutition. Now of the stylopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus and palatopharyngeus, the auditory tube has already penetrated the pharynx. So salpingopharyngeus is already inside the pharynx. The palate is also fully within the circular perimeter of the pharynx. So the palate is actually within the pharynx. So palatopharyngeus is also inside the pharynx. So both salpingopharyngeus and palatopharyngeus are already within the pharynx. But the styloid process is well outside the pharynx, as you can see in this diagram. So stylopharyngeus, to reach the posterior border of the lamina of the thyroid cartilage, it has to penetrate the wall of the pharynx somewhere. So where does the stylopharyngeus penetrate the pharynx? In fact, all of the structures penetrating the pharynx we need to consider in one go. Now you already know that the stylopharyngeus is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. Please keep that in mind, we'll need to come to it later. Now again here you have a schematic, you have the auditory tube, you have the styloid process and you have the palate. From the styloid process you have the stylopharyngeus, and now you can see that the stylopharyngeus penetrates the pharynx between the superior and the middle constrictor. From the auditory tube you have the salpingeus, which is already inside the pharynx, because you can see here is already inside the pharynx. The soft palate also already inside the pharynx. You have palatopharyngeus, so stylopharyngeus, salpingopharyngeus and palatopharyngeus getting attached to the posterior border of the lamina of the thyroid cartilage. Now let's move on. Now here you have the structures piercing the pharyngeal wall. Now this is the superior constrictor muscle, and these are the structures above the superior constrictor. So between the superior constrictor and the base of the skull, which are the structures that are piercing? It is the auditory tube, it is the levator palati muscle, and it is the ascending palatine artery as well as palatine branch of ascending pharyngeal artery. These are the structures that pierce the pharynx above the free margin of the superior constrictor. Now between the superior constrictor and the middle constrictor you have stylopharyngeus muscle and glossopharyngeal nerve. Between middle constrictor and inferior constrictor you have the internal laryngeal nerve and superior laryngeal vessels. And below the inferior constrictor you have the recurrent laryngeal nerve and the inferior laryngeal vessels. Now you know that the superior laryngeal artery is a branch of the superior thyroid artery. Inferior laryngeal artery is a branch of the inferior thyroid artery. And both internal and recurrent laryngeal nerves are branches of the vagus. Now this is another longitudinal schematic cut through the pharynx. Again here you can see between the base of the skull and the superior constrictor, it is pierced by, among other things, the auditory tube. And again you have the superior, middle and inferior constrictors, and outside them you have the buccopharyngeal fascia and inside them you have the submucosa and the pharyngobasilar fossa. So here you have the mucous membrane of the pharynx and you have the pharyngobasilar fossa. So again we can see that the muscles of the pharynx are sandwiched between the pharyngobasilar fossa inside and the buccopharyngeal fossa outside. Now what have we here? We have the blood supply of the pharynx. So the arteries supplying the pharynx, the main arteries supplying the pharynx are the ascending pharyngeal artery arising from the external carotid artery. Apart from that, you have the ascending palatine branch of the facial and palatine branch of the ascending pharyngeal. So you have so many arteries supplying the pharynx. You have the ascending pharyngeal itself, and you have the facial artery through its ascending palatine branch. Not only that, you have pharyngeal artery coming from the third part of the maxillary artery. If you go to the pterygopalatine fossa, you will find that from the third part of the maxillary artery, you have pharyngeal arteries going posteriorly and also artery of the pterygoid canal. So from the third part of the maxillary, you have artery of the pterygoid canal and the pharyngeal artery going behind and supplying the pharynx. From the facial artery, you have the ascending palatine branch of the facial artery, and you have the ascending pharyngeal artery to its main branches and palatine branches, again supplying the pharynx. So there are so many structures which are supplying the pharynx. Now the veins of pharynx form a network over the constrictor muscles, which is called the pharyngeal plexus. Now some of these veins from the pharyngeal plexus, they form the pharyngeal veins and drain into the internal jugular vein, and some part of the pharyngeal plexus drains into the maxillary vein, which actually with the superficial temporal vein is going to form the retromandibular vein. So veins of the pharynx and arteries of the pharynx. Now you see nerves of the pharynx. Now the sensory nerves of the inside of the pharynx, that is the nasopharynx, oropharynx and laryngopharynx, that we have already discussed. For the nasopharynx, from the pharyngeal branches of the maxillary artery through the pterygopalatine ganglion. For the oropharynx, mainly glossopharyngeal and vagus, and for the laryngopharynx, mainly internal laryngeal branch of the vagus. Now these vagus, glossopharyngeal and sympathetic nerves, they form a nerve network over the middle constrictor, which is called the pharyngeal plexus of nerves. So you have a pharyngeal venous plexus, you also have a pharyngeal nervous plexus. So this pharyngeal plexus actually supplies the muscles of the pharynx, all muscles of the pharynx except stylopharyngeus, which is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. All other muscles of the pharynx are supplied by the cranial part of the accessory through vagus, through pharyngeal plexus. So all muscles of the pharynx, I repeat, are supplied by the cranial part of the accessory through vagus, through the pharyngeal plexus, whereas the stylopharyngeus is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve, and the pharyngeal plexus is formed by contributing fibers from the vagus, glossopharyngeal and sympathetic. In addition, you see the inferior constrictor has got an additional supply from the external laryngeal as well as the recurrent laryngeal. Now it is said that because cricopharyngeal part gets a separate supply from the recurrent laryngeal, so the propulsive function of the thyropharyngeus and the retentive or sphincteric action of the cricopharyngeus are not always synchronized, and when they are not synchronized, a high pressure zone is formed in the region of Killian's dehiscence, which may lead to bulging out or herniation of the pharyngeal mucosa from that region. So the nerve supply of the pharynx is important, and the sensory nerve supply we have already mentioned, and the few glands that you have within the pharyngeal wall, they are all supplied by the parasympathetic fibers coming from the vagus, and a few taste buds that you have on the surface of the epiglottis, they are also supplied by the vagus and internal laryngeal branch of the vagus, and these few taste buds on the epiglottis, they are taken up to the nucleus tractus solitarius. Now we come to the last but not the least, the auditory tube. Now one thing we will mention about the pharynx, that the lymphatic drainage of the pharynx is to the retropharyngeal lymph nodes, and then to the deep cervical lymph nodes. Now the auditory tube is partly bony, partly cartilaginous, and it connects the anterior wall of the mid-ear cavity to the lateral wall of the nasopharynx. It has this cartilage is incomplete, it is triangular, it is folded, it is inverted J-shaped. It has a large medial lamina and a small lateral lamina, which is laterally bridged by fibrous tissue. Now from the small lateral lamina and the fibrous tissue, you have the at origin of the tensor veli palatini muscle, which hooks around the pterygoid hamulus and expands to form the palatine aponeurosis, which is the basic supporting matter of the soft palate. From the medial smaller lamina of the auditory tube, you have the levator veli palatini, and also, which you cannot see in this figure, you have the tensor tympani going back along the canal for the tensor tympani, and descending below you have the salpingopharyngeus. So to the auditory tube you basically have the attachment of four muscles. You have tensor veli palatini or tensor palati, you have levator veli palatini or levator palati, you have the tensor tympani, and you have the salpingopharyngeus. These four muscles are attached to the cartilaginous part of the auditory tube. Now this entire auditory tube is about 36 millimeters long, of which 24 millimeters is the length of the cartilaginous part and about 12 millimeters is the length of the bony part. Between the bony and cartilaginous part there is a narrow zone which is called the isthmus. Now the direction of the auditory tube is medially and downwards. So it is pointing medially and downwards and pierces the pharynx above the free margin of the superior constrictor and enters the lateral wall of the nasopharynx, where it raises an elevation in the mucosa, which is called, as you know, tubal elevation, and which contains some amount of lymphoid tissue, which is called the tubal tonsil. So here in this detailed diagram again you can see the tensor palati arising from the lateral and fibrous lamina, and the levator palati, tensor tympani, and the salpingopharyngeus arising from the large medial lamina. And you can see that the auditory tube and the ascending pharyngeal and ascending palatine branch of the ascending pharyngeal and ascending palatine artery, as well as the levator palati, they are all going through the sinus of Morgagni and entering the pharynx. Now this auditory tube helps to equalize the air pressure between the middle ear cavity and the external atmosphere through the nasopharynx and through the nose. If the Eustachian tube or this auditory tube is blocked, the air inside the middle ear cavity is rapidly absorbed and it leads to indrawing of the eardrum and pain and initially serous secretion in the middle ear cavity, leading to conductive deafness. Not only that, infections from the nasal cavity and the nasopharynx may move up through the auditory tube and cause infection of the middle ear cavity. Blocked of the middle ear cavity leads to retraction of the tympanic membrane and conductive deafness. Therefore, often for pain in the ear, you have to give nasal drops to decongest the mucosa of the nasal cavity and nasopharynx and allow free aeration through the auditory tube. So this auditory tube is again supplied by partly the artery of the pterygoid canal artery, the pharyngeal artery, the ascending palatine artery and palatine branch of ascending pharyngeal artery. The arteries supplying the pharynx are also supplying the auditory tube, and the nerve supply of the auditory tube is through the glossopharyngeal nerve. So the auditory tube is mainly supplied by glossopharyngeal nerve along with the middle ear cleft, and towards its pharyngeal opening it is supplied by the pharyngeal branches of the pterygopalatine ganglia. Now here in this last diagram you can see a sectional view of the auditory tube, and you can see the tensor palati on its outside and the levator palati on its inside, and you can see the longus capitis, and between this levator palati muscle and the longus capitis, this is the pharyngeal recess that we were talking about, the fossa of Rosenmuller. So much about the auditory tube. We have taken up a huge amount of time for this class, but these are important in the books: the pharynx, tonsil, and auditory tube together constitute a considerable volume. I hope you will take the time to go through it slowly and painstakingly. That's all. Thank you.